As of today, Maliuk is no longer the head of the security service of Ukraine. This is now official. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced it. Before that, the president said that he did meet with Maliuk, although there was a lot of speculation before this meeting. It's clear that Maliuk was not eager to give up this particular position, and he was waiting, expecting, and hoping for support, especially from high-ranking officials of the armed forces of Ukraine and the defense forces of Ukraine, who did so on both Saturday and Sunday. They helped him with their public posts in his support. Among these posts, there were also posts from journalists and political analysts, and all of them, without exception, said that this person was in the right place. But obviously, the president has a better perspective because the institutional powers of the Ukrainian president during martial law allow him to remove the head of the security service of Ukraine from office, and then the procedure continues. I'm already jumping ahead a bit, but this will take place in the Verkhovna Rada, and it could happen as soon as January 13th. It will require only a formal vote and resignation in a situation where the head of the security service is no longer the head. This vote becomes more of a symbolic story. That's all there is to it. Next, there will be a submission, and then there will be a new head. What did the president write on his official Telegram channel? Here, I've circled the most interesting part, maybe not very neatly. I circled it, even if not perfectly. He met with Vasil Maliuk, thanked him for his combat work. Yes, that's the key point here, and suggested he focus specifically on that kind of work. He thanked him for his combat work and suggested he focus specifically on that kind of work. There should be more Ukrainian asymmetric operations. And now comes the most interesting and crucial part. What exactly happens next? Next, Maliuk is essentially replaced by this particular individual. This is Yevhen Khmara. By the way, it's actually quite a remarkably good and entirely logical choice made by President Zelensky at the very same time. I'll explain why. But Yevhen Khmara is precisely the person who was involved in, designed, and was the author of many asymmetric responses to the aggressor country. He is the head of the Alpha Special Operations Center of the Security Service of Ukraine. And now Volodymyr Zelensky has proposed that Maliuk actually head this very same Special Operations Center, the Alpha unit of the Security Service of Ukraine. So it turns out that we've swapped Maliuk for Khmara and Khmara for Maliuk. This isn't called, in the political life of the country, the resignation, especially a high-profile one. This is called a rotation. That is, the president obviously believes that Maliuk, if everyone says he is in his place doing combat work and is not accordingly pulling the other side of the security service of Ukraine, the political side, there are different opinions about what the security service of Ukraine does on the domestic political track, how it opposes the national anti-corruption bodies, the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and so on and so forth. But that's not the topic of this conversation. But among Maliuk's achievements, of course, there are more, and mainly its combat work, and now comes the rotation. I would call it exactly that, a rotation. Some might call it a reshuffle, but it's a rotation. Did Maliuk change his mind since he was under some pressure from the president's office? Is it likely that Maliuk hoped he would keep his position and that parliament would not vote for his dismissal? Probably yes. Did Maliuk want to argue with the president and, in a difficult time for the country, turn his resignation or dismissal, call it what you will, into a show? Probably not. He wrote about this as well. And based on the latter, does Maliuk have political ambitions? Probably not. That's my assessment at the moment. And likewise, Yevhen Khmara probably doesn't have political ambitions either. So the reshuffling is happening, but in fact, nothing is really changing for us. Yevhen Khmara is considered to be a person very close to Vasil Maliuk. Essentially, everything that the security service of Ukraine does in terms of combat operations, it will continue to do. And I want to reassure you that, in my strong opinion, things will remain effective. The collectivity of the security service of Ukraine, it will not suffer from such a rotation. And maybe, though I don't want to overpraise here, Zelensky's brilliant decision, in reality, it's actually very controversial because it's just a regular rotation. But maybe it will even be more effective this way. That is, both for Maliuk and for Khmara, the same applies. A bit more about Khmara. Khmara is a career officer of the security service. By the way, he headed this Special Operations Center for only half a year, since August 25th. And it's also interesting to know which projects or activities Mr. Khmara has been involved in. Stanislav Vrokinsky, the former press secretary of the Security Service of Ukraine, I saw his post today. He wrote that Khmara is the author and organizer of drone attacks on Russia, including the Pavutiina operation, which has been talked about so much on social media. Just in recent days, we've heard talk about removing the person who carried out this web from such a position, and honestly, that's just unacceptable. But Khmara is just one of the co-authors as well. So if you were worried about the web or whether something similar could happen again, and with the armed forces of the Russian Federation, yes, I think that we can hope that this could happen again. Next, a little differently. So regarding accordingly this reshuffle, could another former head of the president's office, Andriy Yermak, have influenced this reshuffle? And is this conspiracy theory still alive at all? The one that says Yermak is, whispering in Zelensky's ear somewhere, still working with him behind the scenes? Thank you. Not officially in office, but acting as a shadow leader or the president's right hand, and accordingly of the president's office as well. There are people who believe in this, and Honcharenko apparently is one of them, quite enough so. The strange experience we observed with Vasil Maliuk, who simply disappeared after all those anti-corruption shakeups, showdowns, and he didn't get involved in the Magomed Sulov case, nor in the Husarov case, nor did he comment on Mindich Gate, nor did he say anything about Timur Mindich and the Zuckermans. In other words, none of this happened. It was as if Maliuk didn't exist. And this obviously could be called distancing himself. If this distancing was happening, especially in the beginning, it was in complete contradiction to the position of Andriy Borisovich Yermak. At least that's what many say. It's written in open sources. So given all this, yes, it's likely that Mr. Honcharenko, the people's deputy, is right if he doesn't completely hide this connection, that all these maneuvers may be arranged for the elections and may be linked to Yermak, who advises Volodymyr Zelensky on the key figures in his political pantheon to make them as controllable as possible. Purge is quite an autonomous entity, so according to this theory, Budanov now heads the president's office. Maliuk is the person who, according to this theory, went against Yermak, so now he has been demoted, not promoted. And a more controllable Khmara appears, shows up, and so on and so forth. Another problem, Honcharenko writes, is that Zelensky's ear is still occupied by Yermak. Private Yermak, who still isn't clear where he's fighting, is still hanging on Zelensky's ear. This is a personal opinion, Honcharenko's. They've resumed communication, so he goes to visit him in Concha. Zaspa taking care of personal matters. That's why Yermak still maintains this influence. So it's conspiracy theory. But, today an interesting article came out in Ukrainska Pravda, and many members of parliament have already commented on it as well. And from rumors from opposition parties and where things are basically falling apart, well, that's another side of it. This theory is falling apart, that it's unlikely Yermak can influence anything, especially considering his relationships. Now with Budanov, too. Budanov is now in the president's office and all that, so these things just don't go together. Actually, I don't quite think so. I wouldn't rule out that Yermak still has some power and his voice is still alive. And the fact that Budanov is now closer. Now, to the president doesn't mean that Budanov's voice will resonate in Zelensky's ears the same way Andriy Yermak's voice does. Well, that's the truth, isn't it? Bazugla asks the next question. When will Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi be dismissed? That all these reshuffles will be meaningless if we don't actually carry out a reform in the structure of the ground forces, and especially a reform is needed in the Ministry of Defense, mobilization, and the overall approach to defense operations in general. Yes, that's the overall vision. Bezugla demands an end to the Sovok, as she calls it. And she has already commented on Volodymyr Zelensky's response at the briefing to journalists, specifically to a particular journalist, regarding the dismissal of the commander-in-chief. And here is this excerpt. I'll explain now. We're going to watch it now. But first, the post from Bezugla. It's the journalist's interpretation for me. The president's response regarding Syrskyi's dismissal reminds me of the interpretation of the president's answer to my question to him about when Yermak would be dismissed. Back then, he replied that he would make a decision later, but the press leaked that he said he wouldn't dismiss him. It's the same here. Once again, everyone can review the primary source. We're going to do that now. In the case of Yermak, I was the primary source, but I have to keep my promise not to comment in detail on the closed meeting. Now, here the primary source is public. Will this train move forward with all these reshuffles and these changes in the heads of key agencies? Will this train reach the station called Commander-in-Chief?
The Ministry of Defense, and from the Ministry of Defense comes, apart from production, comes the unconditional armed forces of Ukraine. And we are talking about taking steps one after another, not about being ready today to replace the Commander-in-Chief. Today, replacing the Commander-in-Chief is not being considered.
Well, you heard that, right? So Vozugla says, look at the primary source. Just listen to him. We listened. Honestly, where does it say here that I will never dismiss Syrskyi? Where is Zelensky's answer here? I am not dismissing Syrskyi. Here, it seems to me, it's actually the opposite. There is a specific message that we will get to this issue. But to say that today we are dismissing the Commander-in-Chief, we cannot say that. But we are truly moving towards significant change and more enhanced, greater efficiency. So perhaps for the very first time in all my extensive reviews, I actually completely agree with Bezugla's critical assessment that replacing General Syrskyi is indeed quite possible. And it is entirely realistic. Today,